The first thing people noticed was not his voice. It was the sound of the revolving glass door slamming against its frame hard enough to make the receptionist look up. The second thing was the echo. Marble and glass had a way of carrying emotion farther than dignity could follow. And when Ethan Cole stepped into the lobby of Carter and Vale Strategic Consulting, his anger arrived several seconds before he did. Nia! Her name tore through the air like something physical, sharp enough to turn heads, heavy enough to make conversations collapse mid-sentence. On the 23rd floor above, in a conference room lined with smoked glass and soft Chicago light, Nia Carter paused with her pen hovering over a contract worth more than the annual revenue of most boutique firms. The skyline of the city spread behind her, Lake Michigan a sheet of cold silver, the buildings rising like quiet witnesses. Her phone vibrated once, then again, then again. She didn't look at it. Across the table, the Swiss watch executive who had flown in that morning was explaining expansion projections in a careful, accented English. He stopped when he noticed her stillness. Not the stillness of distraction, but the kind that meant she had heard something distant and already decided it was irrelevant. Ms. Carter? Nia lowered her pen and offered him the same calm smile that had built her reputation in rooms where men twice her age had once mistaken her for the assistant. Please continue, she said softly. I'm listening. But down below, Ethan Cole was not being ignored. He was being watched. Security had already begun moving toward him. Discreet at first, the way high-end buildings handled disturbances, as if embarrassment were something to be escorted gently toward the exit. He was still handsome in the way magazine profiles had once described. Clean lines, expensive tailoring, the confidence of a man accustomed to admiration. But anger distorted symmetry. It reddened his face, tightened his mouth, made his gestures too large for the space. I know she's here, he snapped at the receptionist, who had perfected the art of polite indifference. You don't get to pretend I'm a stranger. You don't have an appointment, she replied, her voice smooth as glass. I'm her husband. The word landed like a stone dropped into water, not because of what it meant, but because of what it no longer did. On the far side of the lobby, someone raised a phone, just slightly, just enough. In this part of the city, reputation traveled faster than elevators. Upstairs, Nia's phone lit again. Ethan. 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 Then a message. What the hell did you do? She turned the phone, face down. Not dramatically, not in defiance, simply because she had already decided the conversation was over. Ms. Carter? The executive's voice carried a question now. She signed the last page, her handwriting elegant, controlled. Welcome to Chicago, she said. We're going to build something extraordinary together. A murmur of satisfaction moved around the table. Hands were shaken. Numbers became futures. Only when the room began to empty did her assistant approach, tablet held carefully against her chest. There's a situation downstairs. Nia met her eyes. Is anyone in danger? No. Is he a client? The assistant hesitated. No. Nia closed the folder in front of her. Then it isn't a situation. But when she stepped into the private elevator, the one that opened directly into the marble lobby, she already knew what she would see. The doors parted. Sound rushed in. Ethan was no longer shouting her name. Now he was saying it differently, not as a call, but as an accusation. How could you do this to me? The crowd had formed that careful half-circle people create when they want proximity to drama without the responsibility of involvement. Lily stood several feet behind him, young, beautiful, uncertain. Reality had a way of aging illusions in minutes. For a brief moment, a fraction of a breath, Nia saw everything as if from a great height. The security guard's hand hovering near Ethan's arm. The receptionist pretending to type. The reflection of her own figure in the glass wall. Charcoal suit, diamond studs, posture straight as a promise. And the man she had once loved, unraveling in a building that carried her name. Ethan turned. Relief flooded his face first, then outrage. You filed for divorce? He demanded, loud enough for the room to become silent. You ambushed me. After everything I did for you? Nia walked toward him. Not quickly. Power rarely hurried. Her heels made a measured rhythm against the marble, a sound that had become synonymous in this building with decisions that moved markets. Up close, she could see the faint crease between his brows, the one that appeared when something didn't go according to his plans. "You're humiliating me," he said, his voice dropping, as if intimacy could be recovered through volume control. She looked at him the way one looks at a stranger asking for directions. "I think," she replied, her tone gentle enough to be mistaken for kindness, "you're doing that yourself." The words didn't cut. They erased. Security stepped forward. "Ma'am, would you like us to?" "Yes." She didn't raise her voice. "Please escort him out." A pause. "Not for effect. For clarity, he's not a client." The sentence moved through the lobby like a shift in temperature. Ethan stared at her. For the first time since he had entered, he seemed unsure of the script. "You can't do this," he said, softer now. "Nia, talk to me. We can fix this." There had been a time when that voice, that particular blend of confidence and persuasion, could have rearranged her decisions. Now it sounded like an echo from a room she had already left. "I wish you well," she said, and meant something entirely different. As security guided him toward the glass doors, his anger returned in fragments. Not powerful enough to dominate the space, only loud enough to be recorded. Phones tilted, whispers formed. Lily remained where she was, watching Nia with the dawning comprehension of someone realizing she had stepped into a story that had begun long before she arrived. Nia turned away first. That was the moment. Not the shouting, not the filing, but the turning away. In the elevator, alone, her phone vibrated again. A cascade of messages she did not read. Her reflection in the mirrored wall looked composed, almost serene. If you had been standing there, you might have believed she had always been this woman. You would not have seen the version of her that had once waited at a window for a man who came home late with apologies that sounded like architecture, carefully constructed, structurally unsound. You would not have seen the morning her world collapsed. You would only see the outcome. And maybe that is why stories like this matter, because somewhere, someone is still standing in a kitchen with a truth glowing on a screen they were never meant to see. Somewhere, someone is still wondering if they are strong enough to walk away. If you've ever been there, at the beginning of the end, at the moment when silence breaks, then you already understand why Nia Carter did not look back. Stay with me, because 72 hours earlier, she was not this woman. And what happened in those 3 days will change the way you see betrayal, power, and the quiet art of rebuilding your life. If this moment made your heart tighten, if you felt that shift when she said, "He's not a client," then you're exactly where this story was meant to find you. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and whether you believe indifference is the strongest form of revenge. And if you want more stories about women who don't just survive, but rise strategically, elegantly, and on their own terms, you already know what to do. Because this is only the beginning. 72 hours earlier. 3 days earlier, Chicago had woken in gold. Not the harsh, metallic gold of summer, but the soft, honeyed light of early autumn, when the air carried a quiet promise and the lake looked like a sheet of brushed silk beneath the morning sky. From the 42nd floor, the city always seemed gentler. Nia Carter liked it that way. Her penthouse faced east, where the sun rose slowly over Lake Michigan and slipped between the clean lines of glass towers as if it had been designed into the architecture. The windows stretched from floor to ceiling, uninterrupted, a seamless frame for a life that, from the outside, appeared flawless. Everything in that space had been chosen with intention. The sculptural Italian sofa in a muted ivory tone. The low walnut table with its single, deliberate stack of art books. The abstract canvas in deep indigo and burnished copper that seemed to change depending on the hour. Nothing crowded, nothing accidental. It was the kind of home that appeared in magazines under titles like "The New Definition of Power Living." But in the mornings, before the city fully awakened, it belonged only to her. Nia moved through the kitchen barefoot, the marble cool beneath her skin, her silk robe tied loosely at the waist. The coffee machine hummed, a soft, familiar sound, and the scent of dark roast filled the space. At 35, she had mastered the art of quiet success. Not the loud, performative version that demanded recognition, but the kind that settled into your posture, into the way you entered a room and made people straighten without knowing why. Her firm, Carter and Vale, had become the name luxury tech brands whispered when they needed reinvention. She had built it from a single, rented office and a second-hand desk, back when people still assumed she was the assistant in meetings. Now her calendar was booked 3 months in advance. Now men who had once spoken over her waited for her to finish. Now her signature could shift millions of dollars. She poured the coffee into 2 cups, because for 5 years, there had always been 2. Ethan was still in bed, one arm thrown across the white linen pillow, his profile softened by sleep. Even like this, he looked like something from an architectural rendering, precise, composed, aesthetically balanced. He had always belonged to clean lines and open spaces. When she first met him at a gallery opening in the West Loop, he had been standing in front of a minimalist steel installation, explaining to a group of investors how negative space created emotional tension. Later, he told her he noticed her before she noticed him. "You weren't trying to be seen," he had said. "That's why I saw you." It had sounded like understanding. In the early years, their life together had been a study in symmetry. 2 rising careers, 2 tailored wardrobes, 2 calendars that required strategic negotiation. They were the couple people pointed to when they said, "This is what balance looks like." Power dinners where they arrived together, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Weekends in New York for client meetings that turned into late-night walks through Soho. Vacations in Santorini where the photographs looked effortless. Sun, white walls, laughter caught mid-motion. They had learned how to move through rooms as a unit. He spoke, she finished the thought. She negotiated, he reframed the vision. It wasn't love in the way movies described, chaotic, consuming, but something steadier. Or at least, that was what she had believed. "Coffee?" she called softly. Ethan stirred, his voice rough with sleep. In a minute." He had a way of speaking that made even small responses sound intimate, as if everything he said was meant only for her. She set his cup on the nightstand anyway, the way she always did, the way she had done even on mornings when she left before dawn for flights. On the dresser, his watch collection lay in perfect alignment. In the hallway, framed photographs traced the narrative of their life. The ribbon cutting of his first major project, her feature in Forbes 30 Under 40, their wedding, Lake Como, her in a gown that seemed made of light, his expression almost reverent as he looked at her. People had called them iconic, not because they were famous, but because they represented a certain kind of modern myth, the self-made black woman who didn't have to shrink to be loved, the white man confident enough to stand beside her without needing to stand in front. It had felt like progress, like partnership, like proof that something had shifted in the world. "Big day?" he asked when he finally appeared in the kitchen, tying his tie with one hand, his phone in the other. "Zurich is flying in," she said. "They're ready to sign." He smiled, leaning down to kiss her temple. Quick, affectionate, practiced. "I'm proud of you." 3 simple words. She had always believed them. He moved through the apartment with the same easy confidence he brought to construction sites and client meetings. He talked about a new project, a cultural center in Barcelona, his voice animated, his hands sketching invisible structures in the air. Naya listened, asking questions, offering insights. It was a choreography they had perfected. Outside, the city pulsed with morning urgency. Horns, footsteps, the low thrum of traffic. But inside, everything remained composed. From the window, you could see Navy Pier in the distance, the Ferris wheel turning slowly against the sky. It was the kind of view that made guests fall silent, the kind that made people say, "You've made it." Before leaving, Ethan paused by the door, adjusting his cufflinks. "Dinner tonight?" he asked. "I might be late," she replied, "if the signing runs over." "Don't work too hard," he said, smiling. The words were affectionate, almost. He checked his phone again, just briefly. So briefly that if you hadn't been watching, you would have missed it. Nia noticed. Not as suspicion, just as a flicker, a small disruption in a rhythm she knew by heart. Text me when you land, she added, though he wasn't flying anywhere that day. He nodded absently, already half turned toward the door. When it closed behind him, the apartment returned to stillness. For a moment, she stood there, her coffee cooling in her hand, the sunlight climbing higher along the wall. From this height, the city looked like possibility. Everything she had built, everything they had built. There was a time when she had believed that love was measured in visible things, shared addresses, shared names, the way people said "you two" as if it were a single word. Now, standing in the quiet, she felt something she could not yet name. Not doubt, not fear, just a faint misalignment, like a painting hung a fraction of an inch too low. She straightened the edge of a frame in the hallway on her way out, a habit she had when something felt out of place. In the photograph, they were laughing, unposed, unaware of the future. For a long time, she had thought that happiness looked exactly like that. And from the outside, it still did. The power couple, the perfect home, the life everyone envied. No one saw the way his phone had turned slightly away from her. No one saw the way his "I'm proud of you" had arrived without his eyes. No one saw the hairline crack forming beneath the surface of something that had once seemed unbreakable. Not even Nia. Not yet. Perfection, Nia had learned, did not shatter. It thinned. It stretched in places no one thought to examine, becoming translucent long before it ever broke. At first, it was nothing more than a shift in rhythm, not even an absence, just a delay. Ethan used to text her when he reached the office, a habit so consistent she never had to check her phone to know the message was there. A simple line, always different, always meant only for her. Made it. You'd love the light in here today. Coffee tastes terrible without you. Dinner tonight. No excuses. Now the messages came later, or they didn't. And when they did, they felt efficient. In meetings all day, long day, don't wait up, travel next week. There was nothing in those words that could be called betrayal. Only the absence of intimacy, like a room that still held furniture, but no longer felt lived in. Evenings changed next. Not dramatically. Ethan was still home for dinner more often than not, but his presence arrived in fragments. His phone lay face down on the table now. Not carefully, not deliberately, just placed. A small, casual gesture that nonetheless altered the geometry of the space between them. He listened when she spoke. He had always been a good listener, but his attention seemed to hover slightly outside the conversation, as if part of him were standing in another room. Once, when she reached for his hand across the table, his fingers closed around hers a beat too late. The delay lasted less than a second, long enough to register, not long enough to question. There were other things, tiny, unremarkable on their own. A new cologne she hadn't seen before. Not one of the carefully curated scents in his collection, but something sharper, younger. When she asked about it, he smiled. Client gift, and kissed her cheek. The explanation slid neatly into place. Still, she noticed that he wore it only on certain days. He began taking calls on the balcony. Not every call, only some. His voice would drop into that intimate register he once used for her alone, a tone meant for quiet rooms in late nights. When she stepped outside to join him, the conversation would already be ended. "I'll call you back," he'd say. Work, always work. It was the most reasonable explanation in a city built on ambition. And Nia had never been a woman who resented ambition. She had built her life on it. At the office, people still spoke of them as if they were a single entity. Nia and Ethan were at the Langham last night. You have to ask Ethan. He knows the developer. You two are unstoppable. She smiled, nodded, allowed the narrative to continue. Because from a distance, it was still true. Their calendars still intersected at charity galas and gallery openings. Their photographs still appeared in industry newsletters. Her in sculptural gowns, him in perfectly tailored tuxedos, their bodies angled toward each other in a choreography learned over years. But in those photographs, if you looked closely, there was a new space between them, not visible, but felt. The first time she sensed it fully, they were at a dinner in River North. A long table, candlelight, the low hum of people discussing funding rounds and international expansions. Ethan was telling a story, one she had heard before, about the Barcelona project. Everyone was laughing in the right places. She watched him as he spoke. The way he leaned forward, the way his eyes moved across the room, the way his hand rested on the back of her chair. It was perfect. So perfect it seemed rehearsed. When his phone vibrated in his pocket, his expression changed before he could stop it. A softness, a private brightness, gone in an instant. He didn't take the phone out. He didn't look. But something had already happened. Something that did not belong to her. Later in the car, she asked, lightly, "Good news?" He glanced at her. "Your phone. You looked happy." "Oh, just the contractor confirming timelines." He reached for her hand as he drove, his thumb tracing that familiar arc along her knuckles. The gesture was exactly the same as it had always been, which was what made it different. At home, the apartment began to feel larger. Not emptier, just larger. As if the space between the furniture had expanded. She would find herself standing in the doorway of a room, trying to remember what she had come there for. Once, she walked into the bedroom and saw him sitting at the edge of the bed, staring at his phone with an expression she could not name. Not joy, not desire, something more fragile. When he noticed her, he turned the screen off immediately. "Hey," he said, smiling, that effortless practice smile. "You're home early." "Meeting got canceled." "Good. We should celebrate." He stood, crossed the room, kissed her. Warm, familiar. For a moment, everything aligned again. The scent of his skin, the steady pressure of his hand at her back, the life they had built around these small rituals. If there was a crack, it sealed itself in that instant. Or so it seemed. The night he forgot their reservation was the first time the misalignment stayed. It wasn't the dinner itself. They had rescheduled dozens of times before. It was the way he reacted when she reminded him. A flicker of irritation. Barely there. Gone before she could examine it. "I've been swamped, Nia. You know how it is." She did know. She had canceled more dinners than he ever had. But she had never made him feel as if remembering mattered less than his schedule. "I'm not upset," she said, and she wasn't. Not exactly, just aware. Later, as she lay in bed beside him, she watched the city lights move across the ceiling. Ethan was already asleep, his breathing even, one arm thrown across his face the way it always was when he was exhausted. She turned toward him, studying the profile she knew as well as her own reflection, the strong line of his jaw, the faint scar near his temple from a childhood accident, the mouth that had once spoken vows in a language that made her believe in permanence. Everything was the same. That was the problem. Because beneath the sameness, something had shifted. Not enough to name, not enough to accuse, only enough to feel. A quiet, persistent awareness that somewhere in the architecture of their life, a beam had moved a fraction of an inch. And the structure, beautiful, admired, envied, was now carrying a weight it had not been designed to hold. Nia closed her eyes. Tomorrow would be another full day, another contract, another room where her voice would shape outcome. She had built her life on clarity, on data, on the ability to read what others missed. And yet here, in the most intimate space she owned, she allowed herself the luxury of not knowing, of trusting the design, of believing that perfection, once achieved, did not need to be questioned. Outside, the lake moved in the darkness, its surface smooth, its depths restless. Inside, the first fault line waited, silent, invisible, inevitable. The morning the truth arrived, it did not knock. It glowed, softly, carelessly, like something that had never been meant to be seen. Chicago woke under a pale, silver sky, the kind that blurred the line between water and air. In the kitchen, the light was diffused through the sheer curtains, turning everything into muted glass. The marble island, the chrome fixtures, the untouched fruit in its ceramic bowl. Nia moved through the space with the quiet efficiency of someone whose mornings had long ago become ritual. Coffee, calendar, email scan, Wardrobe chosen by instinct rather than thought. The Zurich contract would be signed in 3 hours. Her mind was already in that room. Numbers, positioning, long-term strategy. When she noticed Ethan's laptop, it wasn't the presence of it that was unusual. It was the angle. Ethan did not leave his devices open. He closed them even when he stepped away for a glass of water. It was part of the architecture of who he was. Controlled, precise, protective of information. Now the screen faced outward, a rectangle of light against the stillness of the kitchen. At first, she did not move toward it. Trust is a habit. It teaches the body where not to look. She poured coffee into 2 cups, the dark liquid rising in a smooth arc, steam curling upward in thin, vanishing lines. From the bedroom, the faint sound of the shower began. Time, then. She turned, and the words were already there. No searching, no intrusion, just a message left open in the center of the screen, as if it had been waiting. Once the divorce is strategic, the condo is ours. For a moment, the sentence did not belong to her language. It existed in the room without meaning, a structure without foundation. Her eyes moved across it again, slower this time. Once the divorce is strategic, not if, not when we talk, not if things don't work out, the certainty of it stood upright in the space between her and the screen. Her hand, still holding the coffee cup, did not tremble. She set it down carefully on the marble. The porcelain made a soft, precise sound, the only evidence that gravity still existed. Below the message were others. Threads, dates, images. The scroll, it was methodical. The way she reviewed contracts, the way she examined financial projections. Each movement of her finger revealed another layer of a life she had not been invited to live. Photographs, Ethan in a cafe she knew, not because she had been there with him, but because she had once recommended it to a client for a private meeting. His hand across a table. Not her hand. A woman. Young. Light falling across her hair in a way that suggested she had never doubted being seen. There was a timestamp. 3 weeks ago. That was the night he had told Nia the meeting ran late. Further down, a lease agreement. A second address. Messages discussing furniture. She doesn't notice anything. She's always working. She'll be fine. She has the business. The words were not cruel in tone. They were worse. They were practical, strategic. The language of negotiation applied to a marriage. Her marriage. The shower turned off. Water still moved through the pipes behind the walls. A soft, steady sound that seemed impossibly distant. Nia did not rush. She did not gasp. She did not collapse under the cinematic weight such moments were supposed to carry. Instead, she began to document. Her phone appeared in her hand without her remembering reaching for it. One photograph, then another. Full screen, thread, dates, the lease, the email exchange with a lawyer. Each image framed with the same precision she used when reviewing brand proposals. Evidence. Not because she understood everything, but because she understood enough. The language of strategic divorce was not emotional. It was financial, positioning, asset allocation. Her name appeared in one of the emails, not as a person, as a variable. Given her income differential, timing is essential. She read it twice, not because she needed to, but because repetition made it real. In the reflection of the screen, she saw her own face, composed, eyes clear. The same woman who in less than 3 hours would walk into a boardroom and negotiate from a position of absolute control. The same woman he had described as predictable. The same woman he believed he had time to dismantle. From the hallway came the sound of his footsteps, a familiar rhythm, the life she had known moving toward her. She closed the laptop. Gently. Not a snap. Not a gesture, just a quiet folding of the screen until the light disappeared. When Ethan entered the kitchen, tying his cufflinks, he saw exactly what he expected to see. Nia at the island. 2 cups of coffee. Morning light. Normal. Smells good, he said, leaning down to kiss her cheek. His lips were warm. His voice carried that effortless affection that had once rearranged her entire day. Big morning, he added, reaching for his cup. She handed it to him. Their fingers touched. The contact was identical to every morning before, which was how she knew that everything had changed. Flight to New York later, he said casually. Site meeting. She nodded. How long? 2 days. 2 days in the apartment she had just discovered. 2 days in a life he had already begun to move into. Text me when you land, she replied. The line came out perfectly. Tone, timing, even the small smile. He didn't look at her when he said, of course. His attention was already on his phone. A message arrived. His mouth softened. The same expression she had seen at the dinner in River North. Now she knew where it came from. He finished his coffee and moved toward the door. I'll see you tonight if you're back early, he said. The future spoken in the present tense. She walked him to the hallway, watched him pick up his keys, watched him leave. The door closed with the same muted click it always made. And in the silence that followed, the apartment became something else. Not the home from the magazines. Not the architecture of a shared life, but a space divided by knowledge. She stood there for a long time, not moving, not crying. The lake beyond the windows had shifted from silver to blue. The city continued its morning ascent. Somewhere, a siren rose and fell. Her phone lay on the counter, the images stored in its memory. Proof. Not of betrayal. She had seen enough to know that word was too small, but of intention. He had not fallen. He had planned. That was the fracture, not the other woman, not the messages, the strategy, the careful positioning of her life as something to be exited at the optimal moment. She walked to the window. From this height, everything looked the same. Traffic moving in ordered lines, people crossing streets with purpose, the Ferris wheel turning slowly in the distance, the illusion of continuity. In the reflection of the glass, she saw herself again, still composed, still upright. The woman the world recognized, but behind her eyes, something had gone utterly still. Not broken, not yet, just cold, clear. The kind of clarity that comes when a structure reveals its hidden design. In less than 3 hours, she would sit across from executives and speak about expansion, about growth, about long-term vision. And she would do it flawlessly, because the life she had built, the one he had underestimated, did not collapse in kitchens. It adapted. On the marble island, Ethan's cup still held the faint warmth of his hands. Nia picked it up, carried it to the sink, rinsed it clean, set it beside her own. 2 identical cups, drying, separate. The first thing Nia learned about a double life was that it did not look like a lie. It looked like good planning. The evidence lived inside her phone now, silent, organized, waiting. And for the rest of that morning, she moved through her schedule with the same measured precision that had always defined her. Contracts were signed, hands were shaken, decisions were made in her voice, calm and absolute. No one in the Zurich delegation noticed that somewhere between the second clause and the final signature, a marriage had ended in her mind. But knowledge changes the way the world arranges itself. By the time she stepped back into the elevator that would take her down to the street, the city no longer felt like a backdrop to her life. It felt like a map. There was an address in the lease agreement, West Loop, a converted warehouse building she knew well. She had once considered it for a client who wanted industrial intimacy. Exposed brick and steel beams softened by warm lighting. She did not go there that day. She went home. Because understanding required context. The penthouse looked the same as it always had. The sculptural sofa, the art, the clean, curated surfaces. But now she saw the negative space, the absences. Ethan's travel bag was not in the closet. His passport drawer was slightly misaligned. The watch he had worn the night he claimed to be in Boston, she found the photograph again on her phone, rested in its usual place, untouched. He had not traveled. He had relocated. Temporarily, strategically, the word returned again and again, like a signature beneath every discovery. She sat at the dining table and opened the images once more, this time not as a wife searching for answers, but as the woman who had built a company on reading patterns others missed. The photographs told a story, not of passion, of repetition. The same cafe window in 3 different weeks. The same corner of a kitchen she did not recognize. The same bed, white linen, positioned to catch the afternoon light. In one image, Ethan stood at that unfamiliar counter, his sleeves rolled up, chopping vegetables. The angle of his body was relaxed, domestic, intimate in a way that had nothing to do with sex. It was the posture of a man at home. The woman, Lily, her name appeared in the messages, leaned against the opposite side, watching him with an expression Nia had once worn without knowing. Expectation softened by belief. She was younger, not in a way that diminished her, but in the way of someone whose life had not yet required reconstruction. Her smile carried the confidence of being chosen. And in the messages, Nia saw the architecture Ethan had built around her. She's brilliant, but she lives in her work. We're basically separated, just waiting for the right time. I don't want to hurt her financially. Every sentence placed Nia in the role of an obstacle, never a person. A situation to be managed, a timeline to be optimized. It was almost elegant, the way he had arranged it. He had given Lily a narrative in which she was not the other woman, but the future. He had given Nia a reality in which nothing appeared to be changing. Two parallel structures, both stable, until the moment he chose to dismantle one. Nia stood and walked through the apartment slowly, as if she were seeing it for the first time. This had been their shared space, their negotiated aesthetic. Now it revealed itself as something else. An environment she had financed, designed, and maintained while he rehearsed another life elsewhere. On the console by the door sat the framed photograph from their wedding. Lake Como, her mother's hand on her shoulder, Ethan's eyes on her, filled with something that had once been unmistakable. She picked it up, not to mourn, to examine. There had been truth in that moment. She refused to rewrite the past as entirely false. But truth, she understood now, could expire. She set the photograph back in its place. Later, as dusk lowered itself over the city, her phone vibrated with a new message. A notification from a shared calendar. Flight to New York, 6 p.m. She almost smiled. By now, she knew the apartment in the West Loop had a view that caught the sunset through a grid of black steel windows. She could imagine the light moving across that kitchen. The one in the photographs, she could imagine Ethan there, removing his jacket, placing his phone on a different counter, entering a different version of himself. Not as a visitor, as a resident. What fascinated her, what settled into her bones with a clarity that felt almost clinical, was how carefully he had curated each identity. With Nia, he was the supportive husband of a powerful woman. With Lily, he was the man waiting to be free. In both lives, he was admired. In neither was he accountable. She moved to the window, watching the city transition into evening. Lights came on in the neighboring towers, each one a square of private narrative. Somewhere in the West Loop, Lily was probably setting a table. Maybe she believed she was building something new. Maybe she believed she had been chosen. Nia did not hate her. That surprised her. There was no image of rivalry forming in her mind, only a quiet recognition. Lily had been given a version of the story, just as Nia had. They were two women standing in different rooms of the same house. Each told the other had already left. The cruelty of it lay not in the betrayal of one, but in the construction of both. Her phone lit again. A message from Ethan. Landing late. Don't wait up. The timing was perfect. The consistency of the lie almost beautiful in its symmetry. Nia placed the phone face down. In the reflection of the glass, the city behind her looked endless. So did her options. For the first time since morning, she allowed herself to sit in the stillness and feel what remained beneath the clarity. Not heartbreak, not yet. Something deeper, a dismantling. The understanding that the life she had been living was not ending. It had already been divided, portioned, and assigned a timeline without her knowledge. But the most important realization arrived not as pain, but as power. He had built a double life, carefully, strategically, which meant he believed he was the only one capable of strategy. In the darkening apartment, surrounded by the evidence of her own creation, the firm, the penthouse, the reputation that moved markets, Nia Carter saw the structure of his plan and, more importantly, its weakness. Because every double life depends on one assumption, that the woman in the first life will never look closely enough to see the second. She turned back to the table, opened her phone, and began to organize the files into folders. Dates, transactions, property. legal correspondence, not as a wife collecting proof of betrayal, but as a strategist preparing a case. Outside, the lights of Chicago burned steadily against the night. Somewhere across the city, Ethan was stepping into another home, another version of himself, another story in which he remained in control. And here, in the penthouse he had already calculated how to leave, Nia was learning the full dimensions of the life he had built without her. A life that for exactly 72 more hours, he still believed was invisible. The collapse did not happen in the penthouse. It did not happen in the kitchen where the screen had glowed with its quiet brutality, nor in the bedroom where the linen still held the shape of a marriage that had already ended. Nia Carter did not break in places designed for living. She broke in transit. In the anonymous in-between space of a private parking garage beneath her office building, where the air always smelled faintly of concrete dust and motor oil, and the lights hummed with an indifferent, fluorescent patience. She had driven there on instinct. Her body knew the route, even when her mind had become a field of precise, frozen thoughts. Level 3. Her reserved space. The car door closed with a soft, insulated thud that separated her from the city above, from the meetings, the signatures, the version of herself that moved through glass corridors with effortless authority. For a moment she remained seated, both hands still resting on the steering wheel, the leather cool against her palms. The engine ticked as it settled into silence. It was the first real silence she had encountered all day, and it was too much. The breath she had been controlling since morning left her in a single, violent exhale. It wasn't a sob, not yet. It was the sound of something inside her loosening, a tension held so long and so perfectly that its release felt like a physical rupture. She lowered her forehead to the steering wheel, her eyes closed, and the clarity she had been holding, the strategist's calm, the analyst's distance, dissolved. Images arrived without order. Ethan, at the breakfast counter, reaching for his coffee. The lease agreement. The photograph of Lily leaning against the kitchen, that was not hers. Her own voice, steady and composed in the boardroom, speaking about long-term growth while her marriage was being dismantled in real time. Her body began to shake. Not delicately, not in the controlled way she had cried when her father died, years ago. Her grief contained in the privacy of a locked bathroom. This was something else. This was the sound of 5 years collapsing inward. The sound of trust realizing it had been used as architecture. Her hands moved to her face, but there was no attempt to stop the tears. They came without elegance, without restraint, blurring the interior of the car into abstract shapes. For the first time since she had seen the screen, she allowed the question she had refused to form. How long had it been untrue? Not when had he met Lily, not when had he signed the lease, but when had he stopped being hers? Had it been at the last anniversary dinner, when he raised a glass and told her she was the most extraordinary woman he knew? Had it been on the trip to Santorini, when he took the photograph of her at the edge of the water and said, "This is my favorite version of you"? Had it been earlier, in some quiet, unremarkable moment she had filed away as ordinary? Memory became treacherous under the weight of new knowledge. Every kindness began to feel like a performance, every absence a rehearsal. Her chest tightened. The garage, with its orderly rows and echoing stillness, seemed suddenly too small to contain the enormity of the realization. She opened the car door and stepped out. The air was colder than she expected. Her heels clicked against the concrete as she walked toward the far wall, away from her designated space, away from the neat lines that had always defined her life. There was a narrow ledge there, a place where no one parked. She sat, just sat. The tailored lines of her suit, chosen that morning for a contract signing, folded awkwardly at her knees. Her hands hung between them, empty. It occurred to her, in a distant, almost academic way, that there was no one she wanted to call. Not because she had no one. Her phone held a constellation of names. Alicia, her partner, her mother, the small circle of women who had built their lives alongside hers. But to speak the words aloud would make them solid in a way she was not yet ready to endure. My husband is leaving me. My husband has already left me. The distinction mattered. One was a possibility. The other was a completed strategy. So she stayed there, in the dim, humming half-light, letting the grief move through her without witness. The sound that escaped her then was low, almost animal, a raw, unshaped expression of pain that had nothing to do with dignity or control. It surprised her. She had not made a sound like that since she was a child. And in that moment, she was not the founder of a firm that negotiated international contracts. She was not the woman who entered rooms and shifted their gravity. She was a daughter who had once believed that love, if built carefully enough, could not be taken apart. The tears slowed eventually, not because the pain diminished, but because the body has limits. Breathing returned in shallow, uneven patterns. Her face felt swollen, unfamiliar. She leaned back against the cold concrete wall and stared at the ceiling, where the fluorescent lights flickered in a steady, indifferent rhythm. Time passed. She did not measure it. At some point, footsteps echoed in the distance. A car arriving, a door slamming, the ordinary movements of other lives continuing above and around her. No one came to level 3. This space belonged to her alone. Gradually, the storm inside her settled into something else. Not peace, not acceptance, a stillness. The kind that follows after everything has broken and there is nothing left to shatter. Her mind, the part of her that had built an empire from intuition and data, began to return. Not with comfort, with clarity. She replayed the words from the emails. Strategic. Timing is essential. Asset division. He had not fallen out of love. He had planned an exit. He had calculated her value. He had assumed her reaction. The thought did not hurt. It cooled. He believed he knew her. He believed he understood her thresholds, her predictability, the way she would respond. He believed she would wait. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, leaving a faint streak of mascara across her skin. The gesture was inelegant. Human. When she stood, her knees trembled, but her spine remained straight. She walked back to the car, opened the door, and caught her reflection in the darkened window. Her eyes were red, her hair slightly disordered, the image of a woman who had just lost something fundamental. She studied that reflection for a long moment, not with shame, with recognition. This was the part no one ever saw. Not the composed Nia Carter in the boardroom, not the admired woman in the magazines, but the version of her who had loved without calculation, who had built a life believing it was shared. She reached into her bag and took out her phone, opened the camera. For a second, she hesitated. Then she took a photograph. Not to remember the pain, to remember the truth of this moment, the rawness, the absence of illusion, because she understood something with a precision that cut through everything else. This was the last moment she would ever be this woman. The last moment she would sit in the dark and cry for a man who had turned her into a line item in a strategy. She inhaled slowly, exhaled. The air in the garage felt different now, not lighter but sharper, usable. When she started the car, her hands no longer shook. The engine came to life with its familiar, controlled power. She adjusted the rearview mirror, not to check her appearance, but to meet her own gaze. There was grief there. There would be grief for a long time. But beneath it, something else had begun to form. Not anger, not revenge, a decision. He thought she was safe, predictable. He thought she would not see until it was too late. As the car moved up the ramp toward the daylight, the city reappearing in bright, relentless motion, Nia Carter understood with absolute certainty he had never actually known her. And that would be the most expensive miscalculation of his life. By the time Nia stepped out of the parking garage, the sky had changed. Chicago no longer wore the soft silver of morning. The sun stood high now, bright and unapologetic, turning every glass facade into a mirror. The city had resumed its velocity, cabs cutting through intersections, pedestrians moving in purposeful lines, the river catching light like a blade. It was the same city, but she was not the same woman who had driven into it. Grief had passed through her like weather. What remained was structure. She walked 3 blocks without consciously choosing a direction, her heels steady against the pavement. Her breathing, she had held client meetings there for years. Today she chose a table in the far corner, not hidden, positioned. The waiter approached with recognition. "The usual, Miss Carter?" She nodded. "Coffee. Black." When it arrived, she did not drink it. Her phone lay on the table, its dark screen reflecting the geometry of the room, the brass fixtures, the marble surface, the faint movement of strangers who had no idea that a life had just shifted its axis. She did not scroll. She did not reread the messages. She had seen enough. Instead, she opened her contacts. For a moment, her finger hovered over names that belonged to another version of herself. Alicia, who would have come without question. Her mother, who would have crossed state lines if she heard the fracture in her daughter's voice. But this was not the call for comfort. This was the call for precision. The first name she selected had been given to her 2 years earlier, at a charity gala where women with controlled smiles in immaculate posture spoke in low tones about settlements and strategy. Charlotte Whitaker, the most feared divorce attorney in Chicago, the woman who had once dismantled the public image of a tech billionaire in 48 hours without raising her voice. Nia pressed call. It rang twice. Whitaker. The voice was exactly as she remembered. Calm, efficient, devoid of unnecessary warmth. "Ms. Whitaker, this is Nia Carter." A pause. "Not for recognition, for recalibration." "Yes," Charlotte said. "How can I help you?" The question was neutral. It did not assume distress. It did not offer sympathy. It offered capability. Nia's voice, when she spoke, surprised her with its steadiness. "My husband has been preparing a strategic divorce for at least 6 months. I have documentation of financial planning, legal correspondence, and an undisclosed property. I need to file first." Silence, not shock. Assessing. "Do you have copies of everything?" "Yes." "Has he been served yet?" "No." Another pause, this one shorter. "Can you be in my office at 1? I'll be there." "Bring everything. And Miss Carter?" "Yes." "Say nothing to him. Act normal. From this moment forward, timing is your greatest asset." The line went dead. No reassurance. No condolences. Just the opening move of a war conducted in tailored suits and legal language. Nia set the phone down. Her coffee had cooled. She did not touch it. The second call required a different kind of name. Not public. Not listed. Given to her on a yacht in Monaco during a luxury brand summit by a man who had smiled as if secrets were his native language. Julian Cross, financial forensic analyst, the man who traced money the way surgeons traced arteries. The number still existed. He answered on the first ring. "Well," he said lightly, "this is a rare surprise. Julian, I need you to find everything my husband believes he's hidden." The shift in his tone was immediate. "Define everything. Joint accounts, transfers, debt. Any account in his name I don't know about. Property payments, credit lines. I want a complete map." Timeline? 72 hours. He exhaled softly. "Ambitious. I'll double your fee." A small pause. "Not for the money. For the clarity of her intent." "Send me what you already have," he said. "And Nia?" "Yes." "Do not confront him. The moment he knows you're looking, he'll start closing doors." "I understand." When the call ended, she finally lifted the cup and took a sip. The coffee was bitter now. She welcomed it. The third call was the one that required the longest moment of stillness before she made it. Not because she doubted the necessity, because of what it represented. This was not about law, not about money. This was about truth. There was only one person she trusted for that. Marcus Hale, former intelligence, now a private consultant for high-level corporate disputes. The man who once told her, in a conversation that had seemed abstract at the time, "Information is power, but timing is control." He answered with a quiet, attentive silence. "Marcus, I was wondering when you'd call," he said. "You don't sound surprised. You only reach out when you've already made a decision." She allowed herself the faintest exhale. "I need surveillance," she said. "Documentation, his movements, the woman he's involved with. I want to know what he's telling her and when." "How clean?" "Legal, always." "Timeline?" "Immediate." He did not ask for details. He never did. "I'll send you an encrypted link," he said. "Upload everything. And Nia, yes. Are you all right? It was the first time anyone had asked. Not in the language of efficiency, in the language of humanity. She looked out the window at the river cutting through the city, at the bridges rising and falling with mechanical grace. I will be, she said. When the call ended, she sat there for a long time, the phone resting in her hand. 3 calls. That was all it had taken. 3 quiet conversations in a corner cafe. No raised voices, no dramatic gestures, and yet the entire structure of her life had shifted from reaction to strategy. She had not called a friend. She had not cried again. She had built a team. Outside, the city moved with the same relentless purpose. Inside, Nia felt something unfamiliar settling into place. Not numbness, alignment. For the first time since the screen had glowed in her kitchen, she was no longer moving through the aftermath of his plan. She was constructing her own. When she stood to leave, she finally finished the coffee. It had gone completely cold. She placed money on the table and walked out into the sunlight. Her reflection followed her in the glass of every building she passed. The charcoal suit, the composed expression, the woman who appeared exactly as she had the day before. No one who saw her would have known that in less than an hour, she would sit across from the most formidable divorce attorney in the city. That within 3 days, every hidden transaction would be mapped. That somewhere, in an office she had never entered, a man was already beginning to track the movements of the husband who believed himself in control. Ethan still thought he was the architect of the exit. He still believed he had time. What he did not understand, what he had never understood, was that Nia Carter did not build her life on emotion. She built it on leverage. And with 3 calls, made in a cafe where no one raised their voice, the balance of power had turned. When Nia stepped back into the penthouse that evening, the air smelled exactly the same. Lemongrass and bergamot, the diffuser she refilled every Sunday without thinking. The soft amber lamps were already on. Time to welcome them home at dusk. The skyline stretched beyond the glass in its usual confident silence. Lake Michigan dissolving into a band of molten gold. Nothing had changed. And that was the most surreal part, because she had. She paused just inside the doorway, her hands still resting on the brushed steel handle, and allowed herself one controlled breath. This was no longer her sanctuary. It was a stage. From the living room came the familiar sound of Ethan's voice. Low, relaxed, threaded with that easy charm that had once felt like safety. We'll push the meeting to Thursday, he was saying into his phone. Yeah, I'll be in New York next week anyway. His tone shifted when he saw her. Warmer, more intimate, the version reserved for her. Hey, he said, ending the call. You're home early, she smiled. Not the polite smile she gave clients, not the rare, unguarded smile he used to coax out of her on quiet mornings. This was the smile she had perfected over 5 years. Soft, attentive, slightly tired in a way that suggested devotion. Wrapped up ahead of schedule, she said, slipping off her heels with the same graceful movement she had made every evening since they moved in. He crossed the room and kissed her cheek. The contact was brief, routine, and for the first time in her life, Nia experienced it as an observation rather than a feeling. He still wore the watch she had given him for their 3rd anniversary. He still smelled faintly of the cologne she had once chosen because it reminded her of winter evenings in Cedarwood. Every detail was intact. Every detail was a lie. How was your day? He asked, loosening his tie. Productive, she replied. It was not untrue. She walked past him into the kitchen, placing her bag on the marble island. Her phone remained inside. Charlotte had told her to say nothing. Julian had told her to wait. Marcus had told her timing was control. So she moved through the space as if none of it existed. The hidden apartment, the transfers, the strategy designed to erase her. Dinner? She asked lightly. He leaned against the counter, watching her in that absent way she had once mistaken for comfort. Whatever you want, he said. I'm starving. Of course he was. He had always been hungry for things he did not have to cook. Nia opened the refrigerator and began assembling ingredients with a precision that came from years of repetition. Garlic, cherry tomatoes, fresh basil. The ritual grounded her. The domestic choreography of their life, The one he had described in emails as predictable became, in that moment, her most powerful disguise. Behind her, Ethan scrolled to his phone. She did not need to see the screen to know who he was writing to. The angle of his shoulders had changed. There was a softness in his mouth, a private tenderness she had once believed belonged to her. "Thinking we should go away next month," he said suddenly. "Maybe Napa. It's been a while since we had a break." She turned, knife still in her hand, and met his eyes. "Sounds perfect." The ease of the lie startled even her. But it was not a lie. It was a performance. He smiled, satisfied, and went back to his messages. While the pasta boiled, Nia set the table. 2 plates, 2 glasses. The linen napkins she had insisted on buying because she believed in the idea of everyday beauty. Her movements were unhurried, graceful, the embodiment of the woman he had described to someone else as safe. Inside, she cataloged everything. The time he checked his phone, the moment he stepped into his office for a quick call, the way his voice lowered when he closed the door. Marcus would want patterns. Julian would want timelines. Charlotte would want leverage. Dinner passed in a blur of ordinary conversation. His project, her client meeting, a new restaurant someone had recommended. At one point, he reached across the table and took her hand. "You've been quiet lately," he said. "Everything okay?" She tilted her head slightly, the gesture he once called her listening face. "Just a lot on my mind," she replied. "Nothing bad." Concern flickered across his features. "Convincing." He squeezed her fingers. "You know you can tell me anything." The irony was so sharp, it almost felt like humor. "I know," she said softly. Later, when he disappeared into the bedroom to shower, Nia cleared the table and washed the dishes with the same methodical care she always had. The water ran hot over her hands. The city glittered beyond the glass. Her reflection in the darkened window looked composed, untouched. If anyone had seen her, they would have believed in the perfection of her life. That was the brilliance of it. The performance did not require invention. She had been this woman for years. The devoted wife. The partner who remembered his schedule better than her own. The woman who built a home around his absence and called it love. Now she wore that role deliberately, and in doing so, she reclaimed it. When he came back into the living room in a t-shirt and sweatpants, he looked younger, more vulnerable, the version of him she had once protected from the world. He sat beside her on the sofa, pulling her close with an ease that had always felt like belonging. They watched something on television. She did not register a single image. She registered only the rhythm of his breathing, the weight of his arm around her shoulders, the illusion of intimacy. At one point, he kissed her temple. "Love you," he murmured. Her heart did not break. It did not soften. It observed. "I love you too," she said. The words left her mouth like a line in a script. That night, lying beside him in the darkness, she stared at the ceiling while his body settled into sleep. This bed had once been the center of her world, the place where plans were whispered, where grief was shared, where the future felt tangible. Now it was a location, a coordinate in a strategy. His breathing deepened, steady, trusting. He believed everything was normal. He believed she had seen nothing. He believed time was still on his side. In the quiet, Nia turned her head and looked at him. Really looked at the face she had memorized, at the man she had loved without reservation. There was no hatred. Hatred required heat. What she felt was colder, clearer, a final, precise understanding. He had underestimated her because she had allowed him to. He had mistaken devotion for simplicity. He had mistaken love for weakness. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow she would wake before him, make coffee, ask about his meeting, kiss him goodbye. She would continue to be perfect for exactly as long as it served her. Because the most powerful position on a chessboard was the one your opponent believed was harmless. And Ethan, drifting deeper into sleep beside her, still believed she was his safest move. The file arrived at 2:17 a.m., not by email, not through any channel that could be traced by accident or curiosity. A single, encrypted notification appeared on Nia's phone, its screen lighting the darkness of the bedroom in a soft, cold glow. Ethan did not stir. He slept the way he always had, deeply, carelessly, as if the world had never required vigilance from him. For a moment, she remained still, listening to the rhythm of his breathing, the familiar cadence that had once lulled her into peace. Then she slipped from the bed with the same silent precision she used when she woke early for international calls, wrapping a robe around her body like armor made of silk. The living room was shadowed, the city outside reduced to scattered constellations of light. She did not turn on any lamps. The illumination from her phone was enough. She sat at the long dining table, the one she had chosen because she believed in conversations that lasted for hours, and opened the link. The first page was simple, confidential. Subject, Ethan Walker. The words did not hurt. They organized. Marcus did not believe in theatrics. His reports were clean, structured, elegant in their brutality. Each line existed to remove illusion. Timeline, financial movement, property acquisition, communications. Every category a door that, once opened, could never be closed again. Nia scrolled slowly, not because she was afraid, but because she understood that this was the moment when emotion would try to return, when memory would attempt to defend what truth dismantled. She would not let it. The apartment in Tribeca appeared first, a full-page photograph. Floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist interior, the kind of space featured in magazines, staged, immaculate, devoid of history. A second image, Ethan standing in that kitchen, his hand resting casually on the counter, the posture identical to the one he used in their own home. He looked younger there, or perhaps simply unburdened by the need to perform a marriage. Below the image, lease signed 6 months prior. Primary financial source, diverted funds from joint account. Her eyes did not move for several seconds, not because she was shocked, because of the elegance of the betrayal. He had not simply taken money. He had transferred it in increments so small they resembled routine expenses. A dinner here, a flight there, consulting fees that never existed. A slow, deliberate siphoning, like someone draining a reservoir drop by drop while the surface remained perfectly still. Julian's work was unmistakable. Color-coded transactions, cross-referenced dates, a map of movement so precise it felt like watching the anatomy of a lie. $37,000. The number itself meant nothing to her. She had closed deals worth 10 times that before lunch. But the intention behind it, the belief that she would never notice, was almost intimate. A message written in numbers. You are not looking. She moved to the next section. Communication log. Lily Hart. The name sat there with quiet finality. Younger than Nia by 8 years. Interior designer. No prior knowledge of the marriage's actual status. Marcus had underlined that. Not to absolve. To clarify. There were transcripts, conversations recorded in public places, voices captured because they had spoken without caution. I just need a few more months, Ethan had said. The divorce has to be strategic. Strategic. The word again. The way he used it when discussing acquisitions. The way he had once described their 5-year plan over dinner, his hand covering hers as if their futures were inseparable. I told you, Lily had replied in one recording, her voice light, almost laughing. I don't want the money. I just want you. Nia closed her eyes for a moment. Not in pain, in comprehension. He had given Lily a version of himself that did not exist. He had given Nia a version of himself that was already leaving. 2 parallel fictions, both carefully maintained. She continued. There were photographs, timestamps in the corner, locations beneath them. A restaurant in Soho. A weekend in the Hamptons, he had told Nia, was a conference. An afternoon walk along the river on a Tuesday when he had texted her, back-to-back meetings, don't wait up. Each image was a small, precise incision, not into her heart, into the narrative she had lived inside. Further down, a section marked, Legal Strategy, Attorney David Klein. Charlotte would appreciate this. Drafts of arguments. Claims that the penthouse had been purchased with marital support. Suggestions to portray Nia as emotionally dependent on the relationship. Recommendations to document her long working hours as neglect. She read that paragraph 3 times. Not because she doubted, because of its audacity. He was going to argue that she had built her own success on his stability, that she owed him for the life she had created. A slow, unfamiliar sensation moved through her then. Not grief, not anger. Respect for the scale of his miscalculation. He did not know her at all. The final section was the smallest. A single photograph taken that morning. Ethan leaving their building, his expression distracted, his phone pressed to his ear. Time-stamped 8:12 a.m. Below it, Marcus had written one line. Subject believes operational timeline remains undiscovered. Nia leaned back in the chair. The city outside had shifted toward dawn, the horizon beginning to pale. In the bedroom, Ethan turned in his sleep. For the first time since she had opened the file, she allowed herself to feel something. Not sorrow for the marriage. That had already been mourned in a parking garage beneath her office. What she felt now was clarity so complete it was almost serene. This was the truth. Not the version she had constructed to make love easy. Not the version he had constructed to make leaving profitable. This structure, documented, indisputable. She closed the dossier and sat there in the half-light, her hands resting on the table. 5 years of memory had been reduced to data, and yet she did not feel diminished. If anything, she felt returned to herself, because every page of that report confirmed something she had sensed without allowing herself to articulate. She had never been weak. She had simply been honest in a relationship with someone who was not. When she finally stood, the sky had turned the color of pearl. She walked to the window and watched the city wake. The first taxis moving, the bridges lifting, the river carrying its slow, indifferent current toward the lake. Behind her, in the bedroom, Ethan's alarm began to sound. The familiar tone, the life that still believed in its own continuity. Nia turned from the glass and picked up her phone. The dossier remained in her secure cloud, its existence invisible to anyone who did not know where to look. By the time Ethan stepped into the kitchen, adjusting his cufflinks, she was already there, pouring coffee. She handed him his cup with a smile that had taken years to perfect. He kissed her cheek. "Morning," he said. "Morning." Her voice was soft, warm, unchanged. He believed he still had time. He believed his strategy was intact. What he did not know, what the dossier had confirmed with devastating elegance, was that the moment she opened that file, the architecture of his plan had collapsed. And in its place, Nia Carter had built something far more dangerous. Certainty. The appointment had been made under another name. Not because Nia was hiding. She had never lived a life that required concealment. But because this moment was not meant for the version of her the world recognized. It was for the woman she was becoming. The salon occupied the top floor of a restored Art Deco building on Michigan Avenue, a place where glass met brass, and every surface reflected light as if it had been instructed to do so. She had passed it 100 times without entering, its windows revealing silhouettes of women in mid-transformation, heads tilted back at porcelain sinks, stylists moving around them like sculptors. Today, she stepped through the doors. The receptionist looked up with a trained, luminous smile that shifted into something more attentive when recognition flickered. "Ms. Carter, I have a reservation," Nia said gently, offering the alias. The woman did not correct herself. Of course she didn't. Discretion was the most expensive service offered here. She was led through a corridor lined with mirrors that did not distort, that did not flatter, that simply revealed. At the end waited a chair positioned before a wall of glass, the city unfolding below in geometric precision. "Tell me what we're doing," the stylist said. He was in his 40s, dressed in black, his hands long and articulate, his gaze sharp without being invasive. Nia looked at her reflection. Her hair fell in the familiar waves Ethan had once said made her look soft. The style she had worn to board meetings and charity galas, to holidays with his family, to every photograph that documented the life they had built. A look designed to be admired. A look designed to be loved. "I want it gone," she said. The stylist did not ask what. He understood. "How far?" he asked. She reached up and gathered the length at the nape of her neck, feeling its weight. Years of careful maintenance, of conditioning treatments in subtle highlights, of choosing the version of herself that made others comfortable. All of it. For the first time since she had spoken, he hesitated. "Are you sure?" She met her own eyes in the mirror. Not the eyes of the woman who had cried in a parking garage. Not the eyes of the perfect wife who moved through a penthouse with curated grace. These eyes were steady. Clear. Yes. The first cut was almost silent, a soft, decisive sound, the past separating from the present. She watched the long section of hair fall into his hand, dark against the pale floor, and felt something inside her loosen. Not loss. Release. The stylist worked with concentration, each movement precise, deliberate. He did not chatter the way many did. He did not fill the air with questions about her life. He treated the transformation as an act of architecture. Shape, line, balance. As the length disappeared, her face emerged in a way it had not before. The sharp intelligence of her cheekbones, the elegant angle of her jaw, the strength in her neck. She had always been beautiful. But this was not beauty designed to be received. This was beauty that existed on its own terms. When he turned the chair slightly and began refining the cut, she saw a woman she did not immediately recognize. The softness had been replaced by clarity. The style framed her eyes instead of hiding them. She looked taller, stronger, as if the space around her had adjusted to accommodate her actual presence. "What do you think?" he asked finally. She did not answer right away. She stood, moved closer to the mirror, touched the line of her hair where it ended just below her jaw. For a moment, she thought of the photographs in the dossier, the apartment in Tribeca, the life that had been constructed in parallel to her own. And she realized something with a quiet, almost startling certainty. That woman would never have been invited into that space. This woman would never need to be. "Perfect," she said, but the transformation did not end there. She had already called ahead to have the makeup artist waiting. A woman with silver braids in the calm authority of someone who understood faces as maps of history and possibility. "What are we celebrating?" she asked as she laid out brushes like instruments. "Change," Nia replied. The makeup was not dramatic. It did not mask. It revealed. Her skin, luminous, even, untouched by the exhaustion of the last week. Her eyes, deepened, defined, the gold in her irises catching the light. Her lips, a shade richer than her own, the color of something unapologetically alive. Each stroke was an act of emphasis rather than concealment. When it was finished, Nia did not look transformed in the way magazines described. She looked inevitable, as if this had always been her true face, and everything before had been an introduction. The final step waited in the private fitting room. A garment bag hung against the wall. She had chosen it 3 days earlier without knowing exactly when she would wear it. A suit. Not the charcoal and navy she wore to negotiations. This one was deep emerald, the fabric fluid and structured at once, the tailoring precise enough to feel like a second skin. When she stepped into it, fastening the single button at her waist, she understood the difference between clothing and armor. This was neither. This was alignment. She slipped into heels that added height without sacrificing movement. Diamond studs, her father's, at her ears. A watch that marked time without announcing it. When she returned to the main room, the stylist looked up and allowed himself a small, genuine smile. "You didn't just change your hair," he said. "No," she replied. "I didn't." Outside, the afternoon light had shifted, the city reflecting itself in every pane of glass. As she walked through the lobby, people looked, not because they recognized her, because something in her presence altered the air. Confidence was too simple a word. This was coherence. In the car, she caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at her was not the perfect wife, not the strategist in hiding, not the grieving lover. She was the architect of what came next. And for the first time since the screen had glowed in her kitchen, she felt not the absence of the past, but the arrival of the future. When she entered the penthouse that evening, Ethan was already home. He looked up from the sofa, his expression shifting from casual distraction to something like shock. "Naya," he said, standing, "your hair." She placed her bag on the table, moving through the space with unhurried grace. "Do you like it?" He stared for a moment, longer than necessary. You look different. Different. The word hung between them, fragile with its unintended honesty. She smiled. Not the soft smile he knew, not the one that made him feel admired. This one was calm. Sometimes change is necessary, she said. He stepped closer, studying her face as if searching for a familiar landmark. But the map had been redrawn. He could not find his way through. That night, as she stood alone before the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city reflecting her image back to her in endless repetition, she understood the true purpose of the transformation. It had never been about him noticing. It had never been about signaling anything at all. It was about seeing herself fully, clearly, and recognizing that the woman who had once lived here out of love had evolved into someone who would remain out of choice. Someone who no longer needed to be chosen to exist. And in the glass, multiplied across the skyline, Nia Carter finally looked like the future she had already begun to claim. The morning she filed for divorce began like every other morning in their marriage. That was the brilliance of it. The same filtered light sliding through the sheer curtains. The same low hum of the espresso machine warming itself awake. The same lake stretching beyond the glass, calm and indifferent to the private wars unfolding above it. Nia rose before Ethan, moving through the bedroom with the quiet grace of someone who had trained her body to exist without disturbance. The emerald suit waited in the dressing room, not as a statement, but as a decision already made. She dressed without hesitation. The fabric settled against her skin like a second intention. Her new hair framed her face with a sharp elegance that still felt unfamiliar in the mirror. Not because it wasn't hers, but because she had never allowed herself to be seen this clearly before. In the kitchen, she prepared his coffee. 2 sugars, a splash of oat milk, the gray ceramic mug with a small chip on the rim, the one he refused to throw away because she had given it to him during their first year together, when everything between them had still been earnest and unstrategic. She placed it on the counter exactly where he expected it to be. Routine was the most convincing disguise. When he walked in, still adjusting the cuff of his shirt, he paused for a second. The same micro-expression of admiration he had given her the night before. "You look incredible," he said, crossing the room to kiss her cheek. "Big meeting," she replied lightly. "Not untrue." "Good luck," he murmured. Luck. The word almost made her smile. He picked up his coffee, scrolling through his phone with the absent focus she had come to recognize as the presence of another life. "I might be late tonight," he added. "Client dinner." "Take your time," she said. She meant it. He would need the hours. When he left, the apartment fell into that vast, cathedral-like silence she had once associated with peace. Now it felt like space. Usable space. Her phone vibrated once. A message from Charlotte. "All documents ready. Court opens at 9. Nia did not rush. She rinsed her cup, straightened the edge of the marble counter, turned off the diffuser. Small gestures that marked the end of one version of herself and the beginning of another. The elevator ride down was smooth, soundless, the mirrored walls reflecting her from every angle. A woman composed, elegant, untouched by the narrative that had been written for her. In the lobby, the doorman greeted her with the same warm familiarity. "Good morning, Mrs. Walker," she returned his smile. "Good morning." The name did not wound her. It simply no longer belonged to her. Charlotte's office occupied the 43rd floor of a glass tower that overlooked the river, the kind of place where decisions were made that altered the architecture of lives. The reception area was silent, immaculate, the air scented faintly with white orchids. Charlotte herself stood when Nia entered. She did not offer sympathy. She offered acknowledgement, the kind reserved for equals. "You're early," she said. "I'm ready." They moved into the conference room where the documents waited in precise, orderly stacks. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Financial recovery claim. Motion for immediate asset protection. Each page a quiet dismantling of the strategy Ethan believed was still his. Charlotte slid the first folder toward her. "Once we file," she said, "the timeline changes. He will no longer be the one controlling the narrative." Nia looked down at the top sheet. Her name, his name, the date, For a brief, suspended moment, memory attempted one final intervention. A beach in Santa Monica where he had asked her to marry him. The way his voice had trembled. The way she had believed that love, once spoken aloud, was immune to calculation. She picked up the pen, not as a weapon, as an instrument. Her signature flowed across the page with the same elegant certainty she used when closing multi-million-dollar deals. Nia Carter, not Mrs. Walker, not the woman in his emails. Herself. The act took less than 3 seconds. 5 years of marriage reduced to a movement of ink. When she set the pen down, Charlotte nodded once, a gesture of professional respect. "I'll have the court clerk stamp these within the hour," she said. "He'll be served before noon." Before noon. Nia imagined the moment. Ethan in his office, his phone lighting up. The carefully constructed timeline collapsing without warning. For the first time since the dossier had arrived, she allowed herself to feel something that resembled satisfaction. Not because he would be hurt, because the truth would finally exist outside her own body. They reviewed the terms once more. The recovery of the diverted funds, the legal confirmation of the penthouse as her sole property, the injunction preventing him from moving additional assets. Every line backed by evidence. Every argument already dismantled before it could be spoken. "You've done everything right," Charlotte said finally. "Most people come to me after they've confronted their spouse, after the money is gone, after the story has been rewritten." "I don't react," Nia replied quietly. "I decide." Charlotte's mouth curved slightly. "Yes," she said, "you do." When Nia stepped back into the city, the day had fully opened. Sunlight struck the river in shards of gold. People moved with their usual urgency, unaware that somewhere above them, a marriage had just ended in a room filled with orchids and legal language. Her phone remained silent. For now. She walked without destination for several minutes, letting the air move through her lungs, letting the enormity of the moment settle into something she could carry. This was not revenge. There was no heat in it. This was restoration. He had planned to erase her. Instead, she had written the first line of the final chapter. At 11:42, her phone rang. Ethan. She watched his name pulse on the screen. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound stopped. A message appeared. "Nia, what is this? Call me, now." Another. There has to be some mistake. And then, finally, "We need to talk." She locked the screen and slipped the phone back into her bag. The river moved beside her, steady and unhurried, carrying the city's reflections toward the lake. For the first time in days, perhaps for the first time in years, she felt something like stillness inside her. Not the fragile stillness of denial, the grounded stillness of a woman who had acted in alignment with her own truth. By the time Ethan understood what had happened, the narrative had already shifted. The strategy he believed was his had been taken from him with a single signature. And somewhere between the glass tower and the Riverwalk, Nia Carter realized that filing first had never been about winning. It had been about reclaiming authorship of her own life. The first tremor reached her not through emotion, but through glass. Nia was standing in the executive conference room on the 32nd floor, sunlight moving across the polished table in long, deliberate bands, when she saw the disturbance in the lobby below. At that height, people were reduced to choreography. Small, purposeful movements in tailored silhouettes. Security staff gliding between the revolving doors. The soft rhythm of a building that operated on discretion. Until it didn't. A shape broke the pattern. Fast, erratic, uncontained. She knew it was Ethan before she consciously recognized his face. Not because she could see his features from that distance. The meeting around her continued, a presentation about market expansion, graphs projected in calm, neutral tones. But her attention shifted to the glass like a magnet finding its true north. He was speaking to the receptionist. No, not speaking, demanding, his hands cutting through the air with sharp, unfamiliar angles. The security guard stepped closer. One of the assistants glanced up from her desk. Then another. A small constellation of attention formed around him. Public, visible, irreversible. Nia did not move. "Ms. Carter?" Her name, spoken gently by her COO, returned her to the room. "Yes," she said, her voice steady, as if nothing extraordinary were unfolding beneath her feet. Let's continue. The slide changed. Numbers, strategy, growth projections. She spoke with the same controlled precision she always had, answering questions, adjusting timelines, offering solutions. Only the smallest part of her remained by the window, watching the life she had once shared unravel in the most public way possible. Her phone vibrated on the table. He's here. He's making a scene. Security is asking what to do. Another message followed. Ethan in their kitchen, reaching for her hand as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Ethan, on the night her father died, sitting beside her in silence, his presence the only thing that kept her from collapsing.